Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of What's Your Story? And on this week, we have, I'm just going to call him an entertainer. He does pretty much everything you can think of: activist, writer, singer, songwriter, artist, the whole nine. So we're just going to say entertainer. He's writing all the way from Washington, D.C. So let's give it up for Roy J.
Hey, what's going on? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. So we're just gonna go
Likewise.
ahead. We're gonna go ahead and get started from the top. And what is your story from the beginning?
I'm a Caribbean American, and I'm originally from the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands,
Okay.
St. Croix, and moved to this country in when I was about 9 years old.
Okay.
And I say this country, technically, we're United States territory, obviously, but culturally, it is a big difference. So it is, a different. It's almost like just going to another country,
Yeah.
especially if you're nine.
Yeah.
But I've been in the States for a long time at this point. I started playing piano very, very young when I was in St. Croix. And piano was my first instrument. And so for many, many years, I was studying piano, into classical piano. Um, when we moved to the States, continued that. At some point, started to do organ, pipe organ. That didn't take a whole lot, didn't take too well, but I was training with the pipe organ as well, and then I started to act and to do some theater work in a particular theater company here in the DC area, and then that kind of just got the ball rolling even more, and I started to sing, and I started to just develop a curiosity about my voice and kind of
Mhm.
figuring out if I could do different things singing wise. And so, the music was always a part of my life, my background, and I had folks who, who supported that and who, paid for lessons and drove me all around the the state, and the East Coast for shows and do different things like that. So I was always musical. The singing thing came later, but I was always musical. My father played the bass violin.
Oh,
We used to go to the Kennedy Center for all kinds of concerts, and just always involved in music and the arts. So, so yeah, at some point I just kept doing it, and I was always good at it. I didn't really know that I was good at it, but it was just what I did. It was
yeah.
just the way of life. And yeah, started to play contemporary music at some point. Was in a jazz band. We played all around. The theater company that I was in was a big piece of that, and so I was playing. I was acting, I was singing, and then we toured. We did off Broadway in the mid '90s. We did a lot of different things. Library of Congress. I was in a number of different sort of groups and choirs, and so just busy. I had a very busy young musical life,
Yeah.
almost too busy. And so yeah, eventually I went to college, and I auditioned for Berklee College of Music, and
Okay.
once I got that scholarship, I went there in Boston, and just things just kept going on. It was really, really normal. I've done a lot of stuff, especially in my early years, but it was all very normal. It was just sort of like, this is just what you do. So
Yeah.
that's a little bit, but
That's very interesting because, like a lot of people don't really know what they want to do. Well, I'm gonna
mm,
speak for myself. I ain't gonna speak for everybody. We don't really know what we want to do until we kind of like live through life a little bit. So it's like
yeah,
it wasn't until I got to college. I mean, I always knew I liked to write and I like journalism and I loved Oprah. So I was like, yeah, I think something like that is in the books. And
yeah.
so when I got to school, it wasn't until I really figured it out. But for you, you kind of like music was just ingrained in you and then it just kind of propelled you. Is that safe to say?
Absolutely. So it was something that I naturally, had an inclination for,
Mm.
but at the same time, I definitely, had a lot of push from my folks, my mother especially, who was the predominant parent who took me to lessons and all
Yeah.
different types of activities and rehearsals and stuff like that. My father did too, but my mother was the one who actually took me and my sister
Yeah.
to lessons and stuff like that most of the time. So we definitely had a lot of support in that sense. But yeah, I knew what I wanted to do in the sense that um, it was just sort of like what I did. And
Mm.
like, now I will say I always wanted to be a pilot. I love
Okay.
aviation, and I know quite a lot about planes and especially commercial aviation. I probably know way too much to not be a pilot.
Yeah.
That was the only competition that I had, was to be a musician or to be a pilot, because it was always
Mhm.
sort of like a little tension between that. But the music always won out, So
Yeah.
so yeah, I've always had that direction. But I will say it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
And depending on how long we talk, I could tell you a little bit more why. But it is a bit of a mixed blessing to have that kind of direction that early on.
Yeah.
Even if you choose it, and in my case, I definitely chose it. But but there's something about it that could, I had to really work out some kinks along the way, especially as I got older, and
Yeah.
I'm still kind of working some stuff out. So it's
Yeah.
a mixed blessing.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can definitely dive into that about how it is kind of a blessing and a curse for you to do something, that you love so early on, and then it continued to be
Yeah,
your life. I would love to hear more about
yeah,
that.
sure, sure, sure. So in my case, you know, I the story is that I told my folks when I was 4 or 5. I started playing piano at 5 or 5.5.
Oh,
But
wow.
the story is, prior to that, um, I was acting like a musical child and doing the Stevie Wonder thing on my little
Yeah.
play keyboard and stuff, and so my folks noticed that I had that kind of thing, and it just seemed to really kind of like be present, and so they um, they tell me the story about how they noticed that, and they asked me if I wanted to play piano and take lessons, and I said yes.
Okay.
Um, I have no recollection of that. I don't remember that. So for me, it's kind of like it's a legend.
Yeah.
But technically, that's I chose to play music, and I continued to choose it along the way.
Yeah.
So there's the weird thing when I say about the mixed blessing is, um, I got to a point where, especially around my first album. My first album, and we'll get to that later, but my first album is called Life in Music. And that
Okay.
came out 12 years ago, actually going on 13 years ago
Oh, wow.
this month. Actually, we're right around the 13th anniversary, because it was either the 14th or the 17th. I think it's the 17th that my first album came out,
That's
2008.
today.
Yep. So yeah, this is really cool. The title track, Life in Music, really explores, um, or it puts into like a frame of mind, this concept between, do I want to do life in the sort of more conventional sense,
Mhm.
or do I want to continue down this road of investment in myself as an artist and in this industry of music, right? So
Yeah.
that's the song, right? But I wrote that because I got to a point where I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing, right?
Mhm.
And so that that came out of that sense of, okay, I've been doing this like literally all my life.
Yeah.
I've been writing, I've been performing, I've been traveling, I've been recording albums and working with producers, and I've been signed, and I've had this manager and I've had that manager, and I've always had this momentum and this sort of endpoint that was like this eminent thing of like, okay, this is going to happen. And the longer that I kept working, um, the less those things started to really seem to really turn over. And so I got to a point of wondering, like, okay, I'm going through life, and there's certain points along the way that you kind of want to hit, in terms of just, self development, right?
Yeah. Right.
Relationships or jobs or, homes and different things.
Yeah.
And you try not to be hard on yourself, but it is kind of difficult sometimes not to measure yourself in those
Sure.
ways.
For sure.
And so, like the whole idea was like, um, I have sacrificed a lot to invest in this dream and in this hope and in this promise of whatever it is my gift is.
Yeah.
And at some point I'm like, okay, but why am I doing this? Is
Yeah.
it worth the investment? So so that's more of a philosophical kind of thing, but
Yeah.
it's a real thing that comes out of that sense of the mixed blessing of having um, this determination of like what you want to be from an early age,
Mhm.
and then like how do you reconcile that when you're 25, when you're 30, when you're 35 as an artist,
Right. Right.
um, and so that's the thing that can be really difficult, not just for me. I've met a lot of artists. I've traveled. I've done a lot of stuff, and a lot of artists go through this.
Yeah.
So probably a lot of people go through this, but especially a lot of artists go through this. This is a really
Yeah.
big thing.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that is like kind of hits it kind of nail on the head because it is like a good point to think of like, yeah, I mean, I'm blessed with this gift and I know I'm great at it and I'm good at it, but like, why am I doing this? Why
Hmm.
am I putting myself through all of this? And it's
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
sometimes some people kind of get into a little downward spiral because they're not seeing that like payoff or that progression. It's like I'm working so hard, but
Hmm.
what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I definitely like resonate with that. Even like you said in life in general, like with me, it's just like, yeah, I mean, I'm chasing a dream, but it's like, is it tangible or is it just a dream?
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
100%, I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, and that kind of leads me to the next question that I was kind of thinking of that we kind of talked about it a little bit, but you have like all this, I guess, skin in the game, you could call it, with, being in music for your whole life.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Pretty much.
literally your entire life you've been in
Uh-huh.
music. So I guess
Uh-huh.
for me, I was gonna say, like, at what point or what turning point would it be for you where you're like, dang, Ro made it. I'm here.
Hmm.
Like what does that kind of look like or embody for you?
Wow. So there is so technically I have made it.
Okay, you're there. Period.
I, I, I'm not. I don't. And so this is weird because I'm not sure if I would say I'm there, wherever there is, but
Yeah.
I have made it. I
Okay.
guess that's the distinction.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking. I'm speaking for myself, but in this interview, I'm also speaking to your audience and whoever is in your audience who is an artist and who is an older artist, right?
Okay.
This entertainment industry and this music industry has a way of presenting artistry as something that only really, really young people do.
Right.
And that if you are over 25, you're not an artist anymore. If you're over 30, over 35, over 40, God forbid 45, or you're not an
Yeah.
artist anymore. You're a has been or you're a failure or something along that spectrum.
Mhm.
Um, and so we, in our culture, um, we tend to devalue artistry, like the
Yeah.
actual expression of human, artistry. We tend to devalue it, and we have a way of depressing it or discrediting it or just devaluing it. And so I just want to props to everybody who's young, because like I was a young artist at one time
Yeah.
and I was new and fresh and so forth. But artistry only gets better as you get older, right? Like it just only gets better, and sometimes it's a shame that we venerate the young so much, because the truth is a lot, I mean a huge part of the young folks that we see and hear, um, they're not necessarily um, they're not mature, like and so they may make good music, right? And they may have good producers and they may have hits and so forth, and on a certain level, yes, that's what
Yeah.
you want to have hits. But um, but having hits and having artistry are two different things, right? and so when I think about how how my trajectory has been and where I currently am, and how to evaluate that, I have to really, and I've learned this through just, self affirmation and practice, and just,
Yeah.
just, maturing, but I've learned that I cannot discredit or devalue my expression and my contribution, um, just because I don't have the sort of, MTV Cribs kind of,
Right.
reality, right?
Right.
And so that's the different thing. That's the difference, I would say, about how I would look at myself in saying, um, have I made it or am I there? Depending on the day, it could be either or.
Right.
Like I might say I'm there, I might say I have made it, I might say one or the other or neither. It's really weird to really say that, but I'm at a point in my career where, um, the amount of work that I've put in, through the years has, in so many ways, been um, such an education, right?
Yeah.
And not just an education about music and about writing, but an education about people and um, about business. I mean, when you're an artist, you are essentially a small business, and
Yeah.
so you are essentially learning all of these things. And every time you go out someplace and perform, every time you get on a plane and go someplace because a promoter or somebody invited you to come do a show or say, that's a success, right? Um, and I've done that so many times, and I've made a lot of money. I made a little bit of money. Sometimes I made no money. Um, Sometimes I've come back from a tour, in the hole. Um, and you know, but at the end of the day, like the idea that like anything that I've thought of, like as an artist that I wanted to do, that I could some kind of way marshal resources
Mhm.
and be creative in such a way where, like, I'd be getting an invitation to come and perform a concert in, in London or in some part of Spain that I've never even heard of, or to be sent material to write to, from some producer in South Africa. Like, to me, it's just like when I think about like what it could have been, I'm just like, that's kind of a big deal, you
Yeah.
know. And so I haven't made it in that conventional sense of all of those big fancy things, but I've been doing this long enough, and I've had enough diversity of experiences like that I'm just like, you know what, like that's kind of like I can give myself a little bit of a pat on the back for that.
Right. And like I said, when you are like chasing the dream and you do have this unconventional way of, making it for yourself, you have to kind of internalize those successes within yourself. Like,
Hmm.
that's a success. You did
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
like
yeah,
just give yourself those props,
absolutely,
even if the world
absolutely,
isn't giving it to you. So for sure.
yeah.
So I guess that kind of leads me to my next question about progression for you,
Hmm.
so I want normally I ask like what strides are you currently taking, but I feel like you've taken so many strides. I'll leave the question up to you. We could talk about the strides you've taken to lead up to this point, or we could talk about the strides that you're currently taking to kind of progress yourself, because in your mind you've made it but you're not finished.
Right. Yeah, I'm definitely not finished. There's a lot, I am at a place in my life where, um, I've had to learn how to balance,
Mhm.
my investment. And I say
Yeah.
investment like in a general sense of like, okay, the things that I do for the Rogier self, right? The artist self. Like I was just super, super career oriented for a very, very long time,
Yeah.
because that's kind of where I came from. Like I said, I was a very busy kid. I was always in some kind of musical activity and touring and theater and rehearsal and blah blah blah. And so as I was in college and coming out of college into moving to New York, it was just all of that.
Yeah.
And I had some good times. I had a little bit of fun, but I was always super driven, right?
Yeah.
And so I got to a point where, like I said, I had to ask myself, why am I doing this? And then I tried to answer those questions, but I still kept going. And at a certain point, I was like, okay, life is short. Life will pass you by. So, what I did was I just kind of like, just kind of dialed things back. But I also started to get into activism. I also started to find communities that spoke to some of the interests that I had. I started to write. I have a little blog, and I write a lot about church and state separation. I'm in communities that deal with activism for, equality of religious freedom and LGBT equality and women's rights and rape culture and all these different sorts of things. And it didn't all start out together like that, but gradually through the years, I started to become more and more embedded in different movements. Speaking out. And so now I have a bit of a hybrid artist sort of personality. I'm an artist, I'm a recording artist, I'm a writer, and all of those things. I perform, I still go out, not when it's pandemic, but I still travel and do my shows a couple of times a year. But I'm also working in activist spaces. And then I'm also teaching. And so I teach music. And I've been working at a school here in the DC area, both a private and a public school, over the last couple of years. And just sort of like also combining that into what I do. And I'm still recording and I'm still, doing new things. So for me, that's the progress.
Let's jump into projects you want to talk about, any that stand out, how many you have, everything.
Last okay, so in terms of everything that I have, I think we are up to we're 35 plus singles or collaborations or albums, like in terms of the catalog.
Right.
Like we're talking about 35, more than 35 releases, and some of them are on my label, some of them are on other labels, around the world. But all in all, it's upwards of 35. But my first, the ones that stand out, okay, I'll put it like this. The ones that stand out, I mentioned, are Life in Music, all of it, which came out in 2008, January. Like I said, it was either 14th or 17th of 2008.
Okay.
And that's on iTunes and all of the things. So if you look on there, I think it has the actual date of the release. Um,
Okay.
but that was the first. After that was the remix Reject, which was also 2008, but it was at the end, so it was basically 2009. And then we had a couple of years after that, there was One of Them Good Girls, which was another single. It was a sort of a two-song kind of release. Worked with this artist named Curious, out of New York, cool guy. He rapped on the single, and it was really cool. We had a good time recording and shooting the photo shoot for that. Then we did. So I did some live stuff with this group called Soul Cycle. It's a
Okay.
jazz fusion group. So if anybody's looking through my site, you'll see, or the YouTube stuff, you'll see a lot of that work.
Yeah.
Um, uh, there's so much more.
Yeah.
Fast forwarding to my last full album, that was 2014, and that was called The Shedding.
Okay.
And The Shedding is a little bit of a smaller album than the first one. It's just 9 songs, but I had a great time recording that and writing it, and we shot a documentary basically about
Okay.
that process, and you can find a lot of that on my channel as well,
Yeah.
on YouTube. So if you put in The Shedding, or if you go to my YouTube channel, Rogiers Fibby, we'll get to that later. You'll see all of that footage.
Yeah.
Um, and we shot a video with that. The first single on that album was called "Messed Up on Love," and "Messed Up on Love" is just a song. It's like a power ballad, kind of R&B, soul. I guess I should say R&B pop ballad. It's an R&B pop ballad, and we shot a video in New York. We had some really cool opportunities there, and the single is basically about just sort of losing, love, in this big way. And so it's a big song,
Yeah.
right? And then we had some other great singles on that record as well. Some of them I still perform to this day. Good to Know You. The Shedding is that next one.
Yeah.
And then after that, there's a lot of remixes and stuff in between. So I've worked with a lot of remix artists. I have a whole house music catalog. So
Yeah.
my genres are like all over the place. So I'm kind of centered in somewhere between R&B and jazz,
Okay.
but pop and soul and house music, deep house, soulful house, um, all of that stuff is in there. And so I've worked with a lot of really cool house music producers, and many times they've remixed those songs. And so if you go through all of my stuff, you'll see all these really like long extended remixes and
Yeah.
um, Demarcus Lewis. Um, uh, there's so many people. Andy Compton out of the UK. There's a whole South African sort of remix, and producers out of South Africa who've done some really really cool work. And these are folks down there who I've never met, and they play my music religiously down there. And I've never
Yeah.
gotten a chance to get down there to tour. So, you know. A lot of stuff that's been really cool. One of the other songs I meant to mention that really kicked off my career was a collaboration with this group called Platinum Pipe Pipers, and in 2005, yeah, 2005, I did a record with them called 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, which is a remake. It's of the Paul Simon remake, but it was on that record, which was called Triple P, and that was specifically like a hip hop soul kind of record. We were kind of like Black Eyed Peas in a way,
Okay.
so it was a group, right? We were a
Yeah.
group, and there were the two main people, Wajid and Sadiq, and then there was myself, there was Tiambe Lockhart, there was Invincible, and then there were also contributions from Georgia Ann Muldrow. I don't know anybody who knows her. And there were also contributions from J Dilla, back when he was alive. And he produced parts of that record. Mark the Clyde Blow, some really like legendary and heavy hitting like hip hop and soul folks.
Yeah.
And I just kind of like happened to get in there at the end of the album recording, and my song really kind of took off, and that
Yeah.
was a great launch pad for all the other things that came afterwards.
Yeah.
And it opened a lot of doors for me. We did Coachella, we did like Montreal Jazz Festival, we
Okay.
did Paradiso in Amsterdam, we did Jazz Cafe in London, and that really was like the timing was couldn't have been better. It really kicked off my own music, my own career.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, you have what did they say? A lot of skin in the game. So I know you have like a tank full of memories of just like great
Yeah,
things that you've done. That's awesome. So
thank you.
that sounds really cool. I mean, yeah, 35 projects
Yeah,
collectively.
and counting. I got some new stuff in the tank right now.
Yeah.
Stuff that's gonna be coming off the conveyor belt.
Woohoo! Because that was leading to my next question.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Are there any current projects out or anything that we can, look forward to?
So the next thing that's coming out, and it may be like within the next 2 to 3 weeks, is a
Okay.
collaboration with a singer and a good friend of mine out of Spain. So I used to live in Spain, and I spend a lot of time touring there. A lot of my most recent work has been in and through Spain, and one of my good friends, his name is DRG. He now lives in Las Canarias, which is a group of islands off of the coast of Africa, but they're Spanish islands.
Okay.
And and so we've known each other almost, I would say, at least a good 15 years. But he's known me longer than that because he saw and heard my music, and then we later on connected. So he'd been following me for maybe closer to 20 years, but we've known each other for a very long time. And he sings, and he had a group that was a soul group of his own. They were based out of Spain, and then he moved to London. So long story short, we're finally collaborating, and the next single is going to be, like I said, 2 or 3 weeks from now. It's called "I'll Take Care of You," and it is a remake of an old blues kind of sort of single from Etta James and so forth, and we're kind of updating it, and so that's the next thing that's coming out, and I'll be sure to let you know once like we get everything like really set. But that's fun because it's like singing with someone who you know who's a friend, and so it's a
Yeah,
little bit different. A lot of times, like I'm working with people who I don't really know, I've never met, and they send me stuff, and we'll do it. But this is something that's a little bit more closer to home, and so
yeah.
looking forward to that. Um, Also coming down the pipe is a collaboration with a producer out of France. His name is Yellow, and Yellow remixed a record for me on my remix album, the second one I talked about, the remix Reject,
Okay.
and he's out of Paris, and he did a remix of the song called For Show, and I had a song called For Show on my first album. He remixed it, and so anybody who's out there, you can check that out. It's on all of the platforms, and you can go to my website and listen to it or buy it. It's okay, you can buy it.
Still
um,
buy stuff.
um, yeah, but yeah, that's the same producer, and so we're working on something that hopefully we can share with you guys sometime in the next what is it, January? So yeah, sometime before the summertime.
Okay. I just have to say that I love that when you talk about like your work, you kind of just like light up. So you can tell that it like really fuels you, everything that you
Oh.
have done or continue to do. So I just had to say I love that.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Oh,
You're
and I meant to say, and I'm this is off topic, but
okay.
I just don't want to forget it because I noticed that yesterday was Aaliyah's birthday, and
Yeah.
it made me think of you
Yeah.
and like how we're like having this conversation like right around the same time.
Yeah.
Were you named after her, or are you named in someone
Directly.
else's? Oh wow, okay.
Directly. Yeah. So the funny story, my mom's gonna love this. The funny story is, that my mom, when she was pregnant, her and my dad had this thing where it was like, if it's a girl, you get to name it. If it's a boy, my dad got to name it. So my parents had went somewhere for their anniversary or something like that, and they had met this beautiful black baby, and her name was Kiana. So for the longest time, I
Uh
was going to
huh.
be named Kiana, and because it meant strong, beautiful black woman. And
Hmm.
so then Aaliyah came out, and it was funny because my dad came home from work, and my mom was like, I have the perfect name. And my dad was like, no, I have the perfect name. And so they were like, all right, let's say it on the count of three. And on the count of three, they both said Aaliyah Kiana Brown. So
Wow!
meant to
Wow!
be.
Wow!
Yes, same
Wow!
spelling and everything. So
Wow!
directly.
Yeah. Wow! Wow! Well,
So
that's nice.
yeah, it's a little fun
That's nice.
nitbit I have about my name. But yeah, definitely correlation, everything, Aaliyah for sure.
Nice, nice. I got a chance to meet her. I remember meeting her
Oh, you did?
in the yeah in the I went to her last album. I was at her album release party in New York, and the producer I was signed to at the time invited me to the album release. This is back in the day when album release parties were like these
Big
huge,
baby, yeah.
big deals, right? And to get to go to one was like a it was just a big deal. And so yeah, I met her, and she was really nice, and
Yeah,
very soft spoken.
yeah.
But yeah, that was that last album.
Oh wow, that is
Hmm.
amazing. I wish I could have met
Yeah,
her.
yeah.
My question would be, looking forward to things from you from the future. So just a few more collabs and singles and stuff coming out, or is there anything else that we can kind of?
Nothing else that at least that I know about.
Okay.
Is weird. The
Yeah.
way entertainment works. Sometimes things just drop out of the sky.
Right.
I'm also pretty on the record about the inequality in the music business that
Okay.
is not just you know racially based and
Mhm.
in terms of our history, but it's also economic inequality. There's huge economic inequality in the music business,
Yeah.
and people generally have no. It's not that they don't know or understand it; they don't have a concept of it. Like they don't know that they don't know it, or they don't
Yeah.
know that they can't see it.
Yeah.
And so one of the last sort of big sort of, and I don't want to say the last because there's always something else, but one of the
Yeah.
bigger um, walls to break down is how inequality plays out in our industry, racially and economically. There's a whole nother conversation to have
Yeah.
when we talk about the 1%. We talk about the 1% in terms of Amazon and Jeff
Yeah.
Bezos and so forth. We don't talk about the 1% in the music business and what that means for people creating music and how that forecloses opportunities for people.
Yeah.
So I'm really passionate about that. Um, my music is something that like I'll always be doing, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want to shape it into my life at this point.
Yeah.
Um, uh, because I'm always going to be singing. I'm always going to have something to do or to sing about.
Yeah.
But also I'm really interested in advocacy and trying to sort of change laws and have conversations to change people's perception of what fairness looks like
Right.
um, to people who are creating um, recorded products and to black people.
Yeah. I mean, those are definitely interesting topics that I don't think a lot of people talk about or like you
Hmm.
said, have the knowledge of. So,
Hmm.
um,
Oh, and can I, if you don't mind, if I interrupt just a second?
yeah.
So I mentioned colorism and and who gets to be seen and so forth like that. But I mean, we can't forget the sexism, and we can't forget the impacts that it has on women of color, right?
Yeah.
Your namesake, right?
Yeah.
Like the things that we've learned, and that many of us knew, over the years. Um, these are things that are affected that affect who gets to be creative in this business, right?
Okay, I think that's all that I have. Oh, where can people follow you?
Yeah,
Become a fan. Say
this is the
hi.
fun part.
Yeah, shout
Yeah,
your hood.
yeah. Well, thank you everybody for listening. My name is Rogier. That's spelled Rogiers, and you can find me a number of places. But first stop, go to fibbymusic.net. That's FIBBYMUSIC.net. Fibbymusic.net. That has all the different sort of buttons and things that you can press to find my social media. But just on a quick note, you can find me on Twitter. I tweet all the time, and that's Rogiers 1, the number one,
Okay.
Roger1 at Roger1. Same thing for Instagram at Roger1. Same thing for TikTok at Roger1. I'm not really on TikTok yet, but you can follow me there and send me a message and tell me to do some more stuff, and I'll, you know. And then in terms of like where you can listen to my music, on YouTube, you can listen and watch. And Rogier Fibby. Fibby's sort of like my little company nickname, last name. So you'll see a lot of Rogier Fibby out there. That's me, ROGIERSFIBBY. Look for me on YouTube. There's a whole lot of concert footage, live videos, and stuff like that, and music videos. So you can follow all that stuff there. I'll follow you back, and then on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, all of those different places where people stream. I talk bad about streaming, but you can find me there. And so if you want to check out the music, oh, and I'm on Tumblr too. Like I said, I'm a writer, and so I write,
Okay.
little op-eds and so forth. So you can find that as well.
Everywhere. Now is that Roger one as well?
No, on Tumblr it is called The Sheddings.
Okay. I mean, is there anything else you think I missed or you want to cover or
Well, yeah, no, thank you for having me and for finding me
yeah,
and for everybody who's listening, and I hope people continue not only to support my work and the work of artists like myself who are out
yeah,
there, who've been out there grinding and laying down the way, but also to continue to support people like you,
yeah,
who are independent journalists and who are out there covering us, because they are a big part of how people come to know us
yeah,
and hopefully respect the work that we do.
for sure.
So I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, support me, y'all.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right, I think that's all that we have for this week's episode of What's Your Story with Roger. And I appreciate you so much for doing this. I really do thank you for coming on and sharing your story with me.
Thank you. Thank you.